Hello everyone. Today we'll be resuming our read on Bendy, the Lost Ones. Apologies for having this getting posted at a irregular time, but I just wanted to get this video out so that you guys could have it as soon as possible. Without further ado, let's get back in to the story of Bendy, the Lost Ones. Chapter 15. I was standing in a dark little street, made darker by the setting sun hiding beneath the dingy gray buildings. I looked around. The time slipped away from me again. I couldn't remember the exact moment I decided to bail on the diner, decided to follow the address on the business card, but here I was, and so I must have. I double-checked the card in my hand and looked up at the address in front of me. This is where the Gent headquarters was supposed to be? But I was looking at an empty storefront with dusty windows. I looked around. I was starting to feel worried, a little fearful. Was this really the place? Maybe I should head back to the hotel. Actually, join my father and those men for dinner, like I told Brant I was doing. But no, I couldn't stomach that. I knocked tentatively. After waiting a few moments, I knocked harder. And finally, I grabbed the doorknob, and just as the door was flung open, my arm practically dislocated itself from my shoulder. I stumbled forward, falling onto the ground. Lucky, it's the film projector kid, Mr. Fusebox. Scott was looking down at my prostrate body with a smirk on his face. Bad timing, I said, standing up, brushing the dirt off my front. I'd say it's perfect timing myself. That was practically worthy of Buster Keaton. Well then, good. I aim to make a positive first impression, I replied. I stepped back into the street, letting Scott out of the building, watching as he locked up shop. Hate to break it to you, kid, but this is your third impression, he said. Right. I said, I was not usually at a loss for words, especially not in business context. But right then I felt, very silly and very awkward. So what can I do, you fool? He asked. I would like to take you up on your offer. I would like to learn, and I would do it for free. I don't need the money. That felt stupid to say the moment I said it. It felt like bragging. I hadn't meant to. I wanted to sound charitable, like Brant had suggested. Instead, I sounded smug. Well, I'll tell you, the boss will be thrilled. You got skills, kid. And also, free is pretty fantastic. Can't do better than that. Unless I paid you, I joked. Scott looked for a moment, suddenly like the idea had merit. Shoot, why did I say that? Just don't tell my father. He believes that hard work should be rewarded properly and fairly. And he doesn't always understand that can mean more than just money. Scott nodded. Of course. Not sure when I'd be having this intimate chat with your dad, but I'll make sure to not tell him that. Thank you. Still feeling awkward. So, when do I get the job? Let's see, you agreed to work for nothing, and you're talented and motivated. I guess, sure. We could give it a shot, he grinned. How about you come with me and meet the boss? Great. Perfect. I'd love that. I soon changed my mind as we sped through the city streets in the man's truck, the side painted with large letters, Gent. It was as if he thought he was on some racetrack, taking corners at speeds that made my stomach turn, and I felt fairly certain his old clunker would fall apart at the next pothole. Or at least I'd lose some of my teeth from knocking together when they did. Where are we going? I thought I knew Atlantic City well, but this insane driving had completely thrown me. Fantastic jazz bar. It's called the Jive Dive. Jesus. Replied Scott, wrenching the wheel and spinning us almost 180 degrees in order to take a very normal right turn. I felt queasy. I never heard of that one, I said. It's on North Side, he said. Oh, I didn't say anything else. I worried if I did I might throw up. You okay with that? He asked, looking at me. Please, stop looking at me. Look at the road. A young woman with a child was crossing the street in front of us. Oh, this was right out of the film. Of course, I said, because if it makes you uncomfortable, why would it make me uncomfortable? Oh, dear God. Scott looked back at the road and casually swerved around the woman and gave her a friendly wave. Well, okay then. You'll love the boss. Just so you know, he can be a bit prickly. Been dealing with a lot of stuff in New York, he said. New York? I asked. Got fired, got the job back, didn't want it back. It's a whole thing. He might tell you about it or not. Just let him talk or let him be. Just let him take the lead. I understand. Most bosses are like that. The rest of the ride was mercifully quiet. As Scott raced the streets of the north side, I held fast to the underside of my seat and tried to breathe my way through the experience. Finally, we stopped. I was able to peel my way out of the truck. I almost knelt on the pavement to kiss the ground. This way, said Scott, completely unaware of the ordeal he had put me through. Or the opposite. I couldn't tell. I joined him as we walked along the busy streets to a small club with bright marquee out in front. We made our way inside. The club was small and dark, but the effect was cozy and intimate, not dingy. The footlights uplit a small stage at the far end where a jazz trio were playing. Each table had a candle flickering away on it. This place was very casual, quite the opposite of my father's club. It also allowed both men and women, which was, I thought, much nicer. I followed Scott to the table in the back corner. A curved, dark red upholstered banquet on one side. Sitting there was a large, formidable-looking man, a scowl on his face. Oh, I had hoped that this was some bodyguard, not the boss himself. Hey there, boss, said Scott, siding in beside the large man. Wonderful. This is the kid I was telling you about. Quickly took off my hat and held out my hand. Hi, I'm Bill Chambers. The man looked at me for a moment, looked at Scott, and then looked back at me, then slowly, with an obvious reluctance, reached out his hand and shook it. Thomas Connor, he said. Well, Mr. Connor, I'm really excited about the opportunity. It seems to me that Jenny's doing some truly innovative things. Mr. Connor stared at me, and then, once again, looked at Scott. What did you tell him? Scott raised his hands and laughed. Hey now, nothing. Just that we were happy to hire someone to work for us for free. For free? Yes. Mr. Connors looked at me, and then I suddenly felt the urge to run away, to just leave the club and hop in Scott's truck and drive it all the way home. Why would you want to work for free? I'm rich, I said. I said it just like that. In a way, I might have been around 7 years old and learned the difference between me and people. Mr. Connors stared at me, then shook his head. Sit down already. I sat quickly on the other side of him on the banquet. It felt oddly intimate. All three of us sitting curved like this next to one another, tried to sit as close to the edge as possible. A waitress arrived then. Can I get you fellas something to drink? I have a whiskey sour, said Scott. The waitress looked at me. Just a soda, thanks. She left, and there was a long pause. I would say it was silent, except it wasn't. The band was playing something bright and cheerful. The customers at the other tables were loud and rambunctious. It was a very lively scene. Except in this dark corner, things were, well, in this dark corner it was uncomfortable. Did everything go well last night? Scott asked Mr. Connors then. Mr. Connors nodded. As well as it could be expected. I can't believe you did that. After everything that man did to you. Not now, Scott. The waitress returned with our drinks, and I was grateful to have something to occupy myself during this. The world's most awkward job interview. Just find it strange, said Scott, sipping his drink. A man has responsibilities, even after everything. It was a good thing, it was the right thing to do, to get out of there. I think you should have sunk that ship, sent it all to the bottom of the ocean. And you know what would have happened then, do you? You know how the ink in the seawater would have... He stopped. I was remembered. Mr. Connors turned to me. You like to fix things? It was so sudden, I just nodded. Well, kid, you better be as good as Scott says you are. There's a lot of things that need fixing out there. Is that a metaphor? I asked. No. Right. Except I was pretty certain it was. Why? What on earth were we discussing? It captured my imagination. That was for sure. It struck a chord in my gut, and I felt, well, a little frightened, but very intrigued. So I got the job? I asked. Mr. Connors nodded. Why not? Then laughed to himself. Sure. Why not? The machine. Anxious anticipation of something unknown. We're here waiting. We can't see anything in the dark, but we can feel it. We aren't alone. Chapter 16. Bill. Time passes, always moving forward, no matter what else is happening. Sometimes you feel like you are running to catch up. Other times you feel like it's pushing you forward so fast you'll trip over your own feet. It passes and moments that have significance stand out. But the rest is a series of quick pictures, snapshots of a life lived. My life jumps. Ignore the concern, and ignore the bits that tie things together. I really wish that I had paid more attention. I wish that the weeks that passed working for Jet had been for something. I'd been more considered to imprint on my mind. But it's all blurs together now. The days were so similar, even as the jobs were not. I'd wake up, have breakfast, read from a new book. I would go to the dusty, unnamed storefront and meet with Scott. And we'd be out there all day fixing things. It might be as simple as a fuse box or as fascinating as some theater lights. We might have to climb the ladder up to the top of a masquerade or climb down to the cellar to work on a generator. It was all a lark. I saw Brant a few times. That lad had a way of suddenly appearing. Had I been my father, I would have thought he was stalking me. He was pretty swell, and I liked good conversation, so I didn't mind his company, as unprepared as I was each time he magically appeared. Well, that was quick. Chapter 17. Constance. The thing they tell you is that how love conquers all. I always thought that meant that no matter what happened in a relationship, if you were truly in love, it didn't matter. But when I was discovering how being in a relationship meant there was nothing else mattered, not to me, but to everyone else. If I was late to help the girls get ready, they giggled and blamed Andrew. Lily suddenly was interested, talking about how many suitors and asking if Andrew would have done such terrible things, and fawning over flowers he sent me. Even my parents, who had been so supportive of me in my quiet ways, seemed so pleased. If Andrew was taking me out on the town for the evening, suddenly I no longer needed to clean up after dinner. Worst of all my new chemistry set sat there collecting dust, being pushed aside as little boxes with necklaces and brooches filled my desk. Love was literally conquering my hobbies, my interests, my passions. Love conquered all things. All that mattered was love. There was, of course, only one problem. I wasn't in love with him. He was in love with me. It was his love, pushing everything else to the side. It was his love that mattered most to my family, to everyone who smiled knowingly at me. Everyone was so pleased, so who was I to ruin their joy? And Andrew was perfectly acceptable, interesting in his own way, kind, respectful. I supposed I would have to marry him. That seemed the way of things. What could I say? How could I express the resentment I felt in this situation? How could I hurt all these people? I wished then that I was rich like Bill, and none of this would matter then, but it probably would. A girl needs a suitor. A girl needs to marry. That is her job. I picked up one of the small glass vials of liquid from my dusty chemistry set. I raised my arm to throw it against the wall. I imagined how satisfying the shattering would sound, how pleasing the liquid exploding everywhere would look. Then I sighed and placed it gently back in the box. Chapter 18. Brant. I made a point of learning Bill's routine. It was easy. The guy was a full-time Jet employee now, thanks to me. Only problem was that meant he was spending more time with his... That means he was spending a lot less time with his fancy father and his formidable friends. What was the story now? Rich kid volunteers to fix the city his father broke? Not a bad headline, but not a front page material. There was not much I could do now. I just had to keep up with the friendship. I knew someday, somewhere, the story would appear. The kid had too much surrounding him to not slip and fall head first into something. Meanwhile, I had to thank Mr. Clark for taking me under his wing. I was in the obituaries now, officially out of the mailroom. It wasn't much, but it was a jump in pay. And it was kind of interesting reading about the lives people led before they die. Most people aren't front page news. It just happens naturally as being born. People are in our lives and then they're gone. Kind of like my parents. I guess not that I'd ever known them for that long, even to notice when they were gone. So yeah, it meant to see their lives lived. The kids, grandkids, even great-grandkids, sometimes. It also could get pretty repetitive, which again, was something that was neat too. Maybe it shows that most people are living simple, predictable lives and are pretty happy. I would have wondered about that. Was it because I had such an unusual upbringing that I didn't think much about a wife and family in the future? That I cared about was making it above the fold? Or was it that the future didn't seem to exist for me? Was it just this black void out there? Just an inky black void? Well, that's a creepy thought. I shook my head and went back to editing. Chapter 19. Bill. It was 5 p.m. and already dark outside. I was standing out in front of the empty Gent storefront, shivering a little in my long black wool winter coat. I was trying to lock up, but my fingers were numb with the cold. I should have worn gloves. "You all alone?" asked an ominous voice behind me. I spun on my heel, heart beating fast. A large figure towered over me, and when I recognized him, it didn't do much to assure my fear. "Hi there, Mr. Connor," I said, feeling intimidated as I always did around him. I hadn't seen him in just over 2 weeks, since the evening at the club. He had gone back to New York, and that had been that. Or so I thought. "Bill?" We stared at each other. Then, "Where's Scott?" "He went home early. His baby is sick." It felt like a lie, except it was the truth. There was just something about how Mr. Connor stared at me that made me feel like everything I was saying was somehow inappropriate. "Great," he said with a hefty sigh. "What's wrong?" I asked. Then immediately doubted if anything was wrong in the first place, and that I shouldn't make such assumptions about people, especially large individuals who look like they could tear me in half. "I need help, but it's..." He stopped. He stared at my hair. He stared at me hard. I raised my eyebrows and tried to smile to show him a little I was reliable, some sort, at least, of a person who was no threat to him whatever. "Can I be of service?" I asked. He continued to stare at me. "I've been really improving. I think you'd be impressed." Why was I insisting so hard? There was something about Mr. Connor that wanted me to impress him. But it's not about talent. I make sure you got skills, kid. It's about trust. Can you be trusted? I was mildly offended. Of course. With secrets, knowing that you can't tell a single soul, and if you do, I'll make you regret it. With a threat like that, who was I to say no? I'm very good at keeping secrets. I wasn't about to go into how I kept secrets on all the things my father knew. I knew my father got to and how he'd earned all his fortune, because, well, it was a secret after all. Mr. Connor nodded. He seemed to understand. It wasn't like rumors about my father didn't swirl around Atlantic City like the waves in the ocean. "Then come with me," he said. We drove to a part of the city filled with garages and packing factories. A place with low-roof buildings and dirt and soot. It was an all-purpose build. No attention to details that might please the eye. We pulled up to a brick building with a nondescript door and got out. I looked around. We were at the edge of town, not quite on the water, but I could hear the waves in the distance. The smell of oil and gasoline mingled in the air. This was a place for hard work. Our path was overrun with dead weeds. Our path was overrun with dead weeds. Ours was the only car parked in the empty lot. We entered the building. Mr. Connor flicked on the lights, and only half came to life. We were in one large empty room, with a few hooks hanging from the ceiling. "Meat packing?" I asked, looking around. "Once upon a time, yes, about 20 years ago." 20 years ago. I understand now. There's more to this building than it seems, isn't it? Mr. Connor shook his head, but somehow was agreeing with me, and led me to a set of stairs towards the back. We descended into a small landing with shelves along the opposite wall. He quickly opened the top of the newel post and pushed something. The wall to our side suddenly started to open. It was heavy and the gears were grinding hard. If I was right, and I was sure I was, this was a 20-year-old door used during probation. The likely thing behind it? Alcohol production. I didn't ask, though. I figured I'd learn the truth soon enough. We walked through the small, dank room, and then through an opening in the wall, and down another kooky flight of stairs. It opened up into a larger room. This one had so much more equipment in it, almost as if it was left behind in haste. There were large tables and sinks along the wall, baskets hanging from the ceiling. There was a huge old icebox with chain around its middle. The bottles scattered about on the floor. All of this I noticed in process, but hardly looked at. I hardly looked around. I just stared at the machine. I'd never seen a machine like this in my life. It was huge, with pipes running in and out of it, but not connected to anything else. It looked new, but used. The metal had a sheen to it, but the seams were rusting a little, and there was this black substance speckled everywhere. Oil, perhaps? What is that? The ink machine, replied Mr. Connor, approaching it. What does it do? I asked, following him. No time for questions. I need your help welding this side together. He had already taken off his coat and was rolling up his sleeves. I nodded and followed suit. What do? You need to pull out the panel on the other side and pull down the lever to control the internal pressure. He passed me a screwdriver while settling down beside the machine. I walked around to the other side of the giant machine and found the panel. I quickly unscrewed it and reached inside. Do I pull it now? Yep, replied Mr. Connor from the other side. I pulled on the lever, and there was a sudden explosion of light. I thought I had caused it until I remembered Mr. Connor was welding on the other side. Sparks flew. I could see them rise over the top of the machine. I looked back down at my hand inside the machine, and I leaned down the peak inside. It was as dark as you would imagine. I could hear the welding on the other side, and silence. What is an ink machine? I tried again. And now we were working. Maybe some casual conversation would inspire him to answer. Something that no one should have ever invented, he replied. Oh, that didn't make me feel good. Why not? Then there was another burst of sound and flash of light. I waited there, holding on the lever, for it to be over, for an answer. My excitement had been poisoned, and now turned sour. You ask too many questions, replied Mr. Connor. You can release the lever and close up the panel. I looked back into the machine and I slowly released the lever. I heard a small popping hiss, and I was sprayed in the face. I stood up sputting as I backed away from the machine. Mr. Connor was suddenly beside me. Hand me a rag. Wipe that stuff off quick, he replied. I nodded and did so, cleaning my face carefully. I looked at the rag, black with the same oil, or whatever that was speckled around the machine. The rag was snatched quickly out of my hand as Mr. Connor stuffed it into his pocket. He said nothing, just turned and stared at the giant metal beast before us. So I did too, gazing at it, trying to figure it out, to deconstruct it, to understand it. The man who built this machine thought he was revolutionizing apologies, everyone. The man who built this machine thought he was revolutionizing an industry. Instead, it created a monster, said Mr. Connor then. What do you mean? I asked, turning to him. You don't know what a monster is? Replied Mr. Connor, not looking at me, still staring at the machine in front of us. I know monsters, the Jabberwock, my father. That was the answer I wanted to say. The what? I'm reading Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Oh, the child's book, he said dismissively. You know what happens when a man makes a machine and a machine makes a monster? I shook my head now. I was speechless. This man who had barely put two words together in conversation now spoke in strange, twisted metaphors. It was unnerving. The man loses everything. I see. Mr. Connor sighed hard. You don't see. No one does. He stole it from him, then begged him to come back, begged him to bring it here. I should destroy it. Who are you talking about? A man, a very dangerous man. But here I am. It's my fault, so it's my responsibility. Mr. Connor, I'm sorry if this is rude, I said, but I'm very confused. Who are you talking about? Mr. Connor laughed. Straight speaking. I don't hate that about you, kid. I'm talking about Mr. Drew. Oh, why that name sound so familiar? And me. And you. It made sense then. You invented this. I did. It's my fault. When you said monster, Mr. Connor shook his head, and then suddenly, he was done with the conversation. He turned and made his way back towards the stairs, turning off the lights as he did so. I stood for a moment in the dark, watching his retreating back. A shiver ran up my spine. I turned to look at the machine once more, and then quickly followed him. And everyone? Well, you know what? I'll leave chapter 20 for next video because, well, I like to read 5 chapters each video. Apologies for this video being so short, but I feel that I should leave 20 to 25 for the next video, and hopefully, well, now I'm just kind of wasting time here. Hopefully, you guys might be able to give me some questions that I could answer at the end of videos. If you could, I would enjoy it, because with time like this, I got nothing to do. So, hope you guys have a great day, night, evening. And hope you guys have a amazing time. See you guys on the next video. Bye-byes.